So, who is John Blanche?
How much time do we have?
So John, for those of the people that don't know, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, for instance, I'm very, very ancient. So I was there before fantasy miniatures were a thing.
Well, first of all, it's hard to not to pick up something that is Warhammer without being influenced by John Blanche.
He forged the looks and the lore of what Warhammer 40k is today, and while I was growing up, I fell in love with this Grimdark universe.
His art style shaped Warhammer, and if you're a wargamer, you have probably seen his work or his influence, whether you realized it or not.
So I've been in the hobby since the 80s, and John Blanche was, his artwork was there at the very beginning. I bought the Terminators, the metal Terminators in the box, and his artwork was on the cover, and it was glorious.
He may be the most important figure for inspiration for how I paint miniatures today.
My biggest dive into his art was when I really discovered 40k. I was a fantasy kid, but when I got into sci-fi and Grimdark, I could see John was leading the way.
I'm just in awe of the depth of his creativity.
There's that one key factor of we just don't have what we have now without him.
Well, I started off drawing with pens way back in the 60s by accident, really. What one of my lecturers at art school said, draw with that, and he handed me a repeatograph, and do you know, I've been using them ever since. And I became obsessed with everything reduced down to this finite point of, it's very attractive, but it's very limited in colours. Whereas you Italian Renaissance artists like Botticelli painted colours everywhere. And it just became too much for me. The browns and glowing oranges and things like that. You know, I try to reduce my art down all the time to the basics, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, like the three pictures there, they're all knocked back and reduced palette. I find that a lot more emotionally satisfying anyway. It has a visceral effect on me. I like colours, I like the way colours interplay with each other. And I think as I grow older and older, I get rid of certain colours. But I love red. I say all that and I love red. Yeah, everything painted red goes faster.
Of course.
That's why I've got a red car.
The very first time I met John Blanche was I was a young man working for Games Workshop, and one of my best friends wanted to be an artist. I said, yeah, sure, I'll see what I can do. And I went into the studio and asked around saying, if you want to be an artist like you guys, how do you go about it? Then this guy came up to me with a beard and said, you know what, young man, come with me, I'll tell you. I just remember this guy taking so much time explaining to me how my friend should succeed in order to become an artist. And he wanted to personally take the paintings and give it feedback. That meeting meant a lot to me. I talked to John over the years, but that meeting meant a lot to me because it showed me that no matter where you are in the hierarchy, and he was way up there, the dignity and that he showed by giving me that time and the dignity that I felt afterwards, that's something I brought with me in life.
Looking back, as a kid, you were reading the sword and sorcery books and realizing that John's work was in there. And looking back, you realize it and you're like, he's been all over the place.
When I initially found John's artwork, I was young, I was like 11 years old, and it kind of freaked me out. Sometimes his stuff looked almost like Grimdark Shel Silverstein, but I love Shel Silverstein, and when I kind of put that together, I really started to fall in love with this weird and bizarre universe that he was creating on the pages of those magazines and codices back in the day.
And during the bulk of the 70s, I was a freelance illustrator, and I'd do book covers, album covers. The most famous work I did was 5 paintings for the Tolkien Bestiary. And At the same time, fantasy figures had made a true emergence onto the market, and strangely enough, the man who ran Citadel Miniatures, Brian Ansell, lived in Nottingham. So I knew him before Citadel anyway, so it was very easy for him to say, do us some concepts, and at the same time, I think we were, as a country, we were going through a recession, and there's a number of people that didn't pay me for working. I was really hacked off with the freelance situation. So I said to Brian Ansell, when he asked for concepts, I said, give us a job then. And so he did.
And then most of all the other books that I was buying at the time had his artwork in there or around there. And it was inspirational. It took you to a world that I'd never seen before. John's illustrations were key to that. And so while you're buying these plastic or metal figures at the time, John's art was bringing them to life. And we would pore over John's artwork in those rule books, evocative artwork that was adding to the story that we were creating on the tabletop.
He's a visionary artist who had his hands on the development of a very popular franchise at a very meaningful time. And not only has he inspired things from the ground up in that way, but he has also carried a punk metal sort of vibe in a lot of his artwork and the miniatures he produces. It's, he's continued to inspire followers of that more specific style. So he means a lot to the wargaming industry.
I think he was the first one to do these two-page artworks that show expensive battle scenes, the type that we still see today in a lot of Games Workshop publications. And it's also the way they would later be written in the books, so his vision stretched beyond just the visuals too.
He's incredibly prolific over the decades with tons and tons of miniatures and paintings and sketches that are just so chock full of details and character and ideas. And if there's anything that I take away from his work specifically, it might be his ability to tell a story through details. And that's something that I take to heart in whenever I'm creating anything creative.
And personally, I think that he has helped bring art movements into the hobby, from inspiring people to kit bash, to convert, to play around with their models, their environment, and create these storytelling pieces. And I think that a lot of the 28 style games have taken root because of artists like John.
There is an element of, and I mean this in the most complimentary sense possible, the insane in John's work, which really suffuses, particularly Games Workshop's universes. And I think it's difficult to overstate, John's influence on wargaming that's come out of Nottingham.
Around 2005, John asked me to join the Militant project and paint some figures for him. I felt very humbled, but I also felt really, really happy that the giant in the industry reached out to me, asking me to paint some of the art that he was working on. Since then, I had the opportunity to meet with John, paint figures inspired by his work, and realized how big of an impact he has had on that whole world, and also that collaborative way that he works. And I think some of the stuff that I've learned by looking at his art, seeing his art, enjoying his vision, is dialing up those archetype characters, working with the color schemes, essentially doing really bold miniature painting with strong color schemes and making a bit more mess than your traditional, putting the colors on in the classic way.
There was no such thing as what was the background of Warhammer, certainly what was the background of 40k. It didn't exist, but I had strong, heartfelt feelings about both systems. I really wanted the old world in the Empire to mimic the real Holy Roman Empire, the late 1400s, because that was so colourful and had all the different racial types in there. Well, I'll say that, but it obviously didn't have orcs and dwarves and elves in real life, but they were there via Lord of the Rings. So with Warhammer, the old world started with the Empire, and the Empire was like its equivalent to real history. Of course, it was the late 1400s, it was full of mercenaries, Landsknechts, and the medieval-esque cavalry, and the Ritter's cavalry, and all had pistols and things. And it seemed to cover a lot of bases. And ancient Greeks, love the ancient Greeks, you know. They had shield designs which sometimes could be a Gorgon's face on a round shield with checkered pattern around. It was so easy to make that orcs. Paint the face red, and that's it. Having a deep fascination, interest in real history. That's where it all starts from. Having that in your head, just like doesn't come from nowhere, but like going to museums, look at real armour, all that stuff had its roots in real history.
Like working with John was super special. I've never had this desire to follow or look up to specific people, except for a very few, and John was definitely one of those. I think Bo hinted at some point that we might do something Grimdark, and he didn't tell me anything else, but I was like, what is that? Could we make a deal with John? I was like, nah, no, that couldn't be it. That couldn't be it. We wouldn't be that lucky to get a chance to work with him. And then Bo and Ian went to England, and when Bo called me from England, super drunk because he was at a bar with Ian, and told me that they landed the deal, I was almost crying, honestly. I was almost crying because it was just a crazy opportunity for me to be part of this.
And with 40k, I remember Rick Priestley, that is, saying to me one day, right, we've got Space Marines, everybody wants to make it Second World War, but they're not, they're medieval monks. And I go, medieval monks like the Knights Templars and the Hospitallers and stuff. So I started drawing sort of a Gothic style, but certainly making all the buildings, you know, Gothic spires. There's always this base of real life that runs through all the Warhammer made-up universes, because they're not made up, they've all got... That's a resonance, you know, even people that know nothing about history and the history of warfare and stuff, they've all got a bit of it in their heads. And I think the school's got such a resonance with people, because we've all got one. Yeah. and towards they are images of death, so they're a bit frightening. You can be a bit fearful of skulls. Pirates, skull and crossbones, hey! So, utilisation of reality, snuck in fantasy, where people don't recognise it, but they can feel it. And it has such a big resonance with the Warhammer hobby as such. So you could say it's not fantasy, it's another reality out of your brains. So there's a lot of shared imagery, which I'd call that word again, Northern European, because we are Northern European. So there's a visceral resonance that we can share with other people.
Right, like his designs are the reason why we have this kind of biker attitude on everything, why we have all these skulls, flames, and checkerboards running across, especially in some of those earlier themes. Being a fan of Warhammer since I was very young, John Blanche's art was presented to me at a very impressionable age, and I always enjoyed the monstrousness. I think he has a very notable, specific palette, and I find myself trying to emulate that in my own paintings. I mean, I illustrate too. How is he not influenced what I do.
The thing about John that you have to understand is that he really forged his own path. Nobody before him did what John did. And he proved that you could go against the status quo with your artwork and create your own aesthetic.
What studying his artwork has instilled in my own personal artistic development was the understanding that you have to find your own way expressing yourself and embracing what you enjoy, even against what might be considered convention by your peers. Something that's incredibly important in miniature painting, simply because we are working with physical things that someone else designed that become the canvas to create our own stories.
Everything that I have painted since I started painting miniatures has been influenced by this man.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that many people consider John to be a modern master, and I think the widespread respect and admiration that people have for him and his work is a testament to that.
On top of being a fantastic artist, John has always been very generous. And to all of us painting toy soldiers, I think his are the shoulders on which we all stand.
What I had in my head all the time was that all the societies behind armies. What are the grim worlds, the terrible worlds that these people behind the armies, or what were they like? What did they do? Hence Necromunda to some extent. Well, I was never very good at drawing orcs and dwarves and stuff, so I always tended to err on the side of humans, semi-miniatures. You know, I like warped humans, you know, servitors and priests, and just taking the basic human figure and making it weird. And visually, I was always interested in bike culture, and I love mercenaries. So it was had the freedom to mix and match with helmets and boots. In imagination, I can have such good fun. So yeah, that's where it grew from.
John Blanche chooses the army painter to make a set of paints with, and it is such an honor. And I think that this goes to show that we're committed to developing products that are good enough for the likes of an artist like John Blanche to assign his name to, but always good enough for you, the core customers out there that are using our products.
When I retired, I thought I was retiring. Numerous people popped up with interesting projects for me to be involved with, and I think that's great. Wow, I'm not really retired after all. Yeah, you've put me in a happy place, you really have. I'll only do what I really want to do. And doing paint sets, 75mm figures, 54mm figures, and a couple of books. That's my life.